They assaulted the waitress with boiling soup, laughing as steam rose from her scalp and she stood there trembling, burns blooming red across her skin. Just another nobody they could humiliate without consequences. What they didn't know, her husband controlled every shipping container that moved through the city, and he'd just watched the video of what they did to his wife. It happened at the Grand Astor Hotel, Manhattan's most exclusive venue, where the wealthy clinked champagne glasses and celebrated fortunes built on the backs of people they never bothered to see. Alora Weber was one of those invisible people, a waitress serving tables to men who made more in an hour than she made in a year. She was good at her job, professional, polite, forgettable, until Felix Phillips, heir to a $3 billion shipping empire, decided she needed to be taught her place. He stood up, drunk and entitled, lifted a ladle of French onion soup, still boiling from the kitchen, and poured it over her head, while his friends filmed and laughed. The burns were immediate. The humiliation was worse. And Felix walked away thinking he'd gotten away with it. He had no idea what was coming. Before we continue, I need you to do something. Comment where you're watching from right now. Because what happens next to this man who hurt the wrong person's wife? It's going to leave you speechless. And if you click away now, you'll regret it. Trust me, stay until the end. You need to see how this plays out. Now let's dive into the story. Alora Weber moved through the Grand Astor Ballroom like water, finding its path through stone, invisible, necessary, forgotten the moment she stepped away from each table. She'd learned to read a room within seconds, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to disappear into the background of other people's important nights. Tonight, the ballroom held Manhattan's logistics elite, the men and women who controlled the flow of goods across oceans, and they were celebrating another year of record profits with French champagne and Scottish salmon. Table 12 was the loudest. 7 people in their 20s, their laughter sharp-edged and performative, the kind that came from never having heard the word no. Felix Phillips sat at the center, blonde and angular, expensive in that effortless way that came from generational wealth. His uncle, Richard Phillips, sat beside him, older, quieter, but watching everything with the same cold calculation in his eyes. Olympus Global logos were stitched discreetly into their jacket pockets. They owned container ships, lots of them. Alora refilled water glasses, cleared appetizer plates, existed in the margins. Felix's eyes tracked her once, twice, and she felt the weight of his attention like something physical. She'd felt it before from men like him. Boredom looking for entertainment. "You know, what's funny?" Felix said suddenly, loud enough that nearby tables glanced over. His companions leaned in, anticipating. "My father started with one ship. One. Built an empire from nothing. And now we've got people who can't even afford a car serving us dinner. Isn't that something?" His friends laughed. Alora kept moving, pretending she hadn't heard. Hey, waitress." Felix snapped his fingers. "Alora, right? Come here." She approached, tray balanced, expression neutral. "Yes, sir? You married?" He tilted his head, genuinely curious in the way a child might be curious about an insect. "I am. What's he do? Load boxes? Drive a forklift?" The table erupted. Even Felix's uncle smiled into his scotch. "He works in logistics," Alora said quietly. "Just like you." Something flickered across Felix's face. Annoyance, embarrassment. His friends noticed, and the laughter died for half a second. That half second was enough. Felix stood, reaching for the soup tureen at the center of the table. French onion, steam still rising from the surface. He lifted the ladle, filled it, and Alora saw what was coming, half a breath before it happened. "Here's the difference," Felix said, and poured the scalding soup over her head. The pain was immediate and total. Boiling broth cascaded down her scalp, her face, her neck soaking through her uniform, burning, burning, burning. Onions stuck to her hair. Liquid fire ran down her spine. Alora's vision whited out for a moment, and her hands came up instinctively, trembling, useless. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The ballroom tilted. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed. Felix's friends were filming, phones raised, recording her humiliation in high definition. One of them was already typing, sending it somewhere. Felix sat back down, satisfied. "That's the difference," he said. Alora stood there, dripping, shaking. Her scalp screamed. Blisters were forming at her hairline. The manager appeared, his face a mask of horror and calculation. He looked at Felix, at the Phillips family crest on his jacket, and made his choice. He grabbed Alora's arm hard enough to bruise. "Break room, now, go." Alora walked through the silent ballroom on legs that weren't hers anymore. Past the staring faces, past the woman in diamonds who looked away, past the man who cleared his throat and returned to his conversation. No one helped, no one said a word. In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection. Red welts, ruined hair, the blouse Stefan bought her destroyed. Her phone buzzed. "How's work, love?" Alora's hands shook so hard she almost dropped the phone. She thought about Stefan, about his quiet strength, about the way he listened when she talked about her day, about how he'd asked her, just last week, if anyone at work ever gave her trouble. "Just fine," she typed. "Long shift. Love you." She pressed send and stared at the burns blooming across her skin. 40 blocks north, in a building overlooking the port, Dmitri checked his phone. He'd been working security at the Grand Astor for 3 years, but tonight he was there for a different reason. He watched the ballroom through the service entrance, watched what happened at table 12, and his jaw tightened. He knew who Alora Weber was. More importantly, he knew who she was married to. Dmitri opened his phone, found the video one of Felix's friends had already posted to a private group chat, downloaded it, and forwarded it to a single contact. No message, none needed. 40 blocks north, Stefan Thornto's head of security received the video, watched it once, and walked immediately to his boss's office. He didn't knock. "Boss," he said quietly, "we need to talk. There's a video. It's about Alora." Stefan Thornto's office overlooked the harbor, and at 4:47 in the morning, the water was still black, dotted with the running lights of container ships waiting for dawn to dock. He'd been awake for 20 minutes when Marcus, his head of security, walked in without knocking. That alone told Stefan everything he needed to know. Marcus had worked for him for 12 years and had never once entered his office uninvited. "Boss," Marcus said quietly, closing the door. "There's a video. It's about Alora." Stefan's hand stopped halfway to his coffee cup. "Show me." Marcus set his phone on the desk, screen facing Stefan, and pressed play. The video was 43 seconds long. Stefan watched it once in silence. Then he watched it again, and again. Each time his eyes tracked the same details. The steam rising from the ladle, the way Alora's shoulders went rigid the moment before the soup hit her, the trembling in her hands as she stood there, dripping, burning, the red welts blooming across her forehead in real time, the laughter, the phones recording, the way she walked away, alone, while a room full of people looked away. Stefan set the phone down carefully. His hands were steady. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, almost conversational. "Who is he?" "Felix Phillips, heir to Olympus Global." That's his uncle beside him, Richard Phillips. They run international shipping, mostly Asian routes, containers, bulk carriers, some tanker operations. Revenue last year was around $3.2 billion. Stefan nodded slowly, still staring at the frozen image on Marcus's phone. Alora's face, soup dripping from her hair, eyes wide with shock and pain. This was the woman who kissed him goodbye every morning, who told him about her day while they made dinner together, who texted him just fine 4 hours ago when she was standing in a bathroom with burns on her scalp. "Where is she now?" Stefan asked. "Home, asleep. She came in around 1 a.m. I had eyes on her. She's safe. Does she know you sent this to me?" "No." "Good." Stefan stood, walking to the window. The sky was beginning to lighten, turning the water gray. "Keep it that way. I don't want her involved in what happens next." "What do you want me to do?" Stefan was quiet for a long moment. There was a part of him, the part that had built his empire through force and fear, that wanted blood. wanted Felix Phillips pulled from his bed, wanted him to understand pain in a way he'd never forget, wanted to make an example so brutal that no one would ever look at his wife again. But that wasn't who Alora had married. She'd married a man who ran a legitimate shipping logistics company, who wore suits and attended charity dinners and came home every night at 6. She didn't know about the unions he controlled, the port operations he owned through shells within shells, the officials who answered his calls at 3 a.m. She didn't know, and he wanted to keep it that way. Stefan turned from the window. No violence, no blood, nothing that touches us directly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Then what? They're in shipping. Stefan's voice was ice. So we use shipping. Olympus Global moves 200,000 containers a year through our ports. Every single one of those containers needs customs clearance, union labor, port authority approval, berthing priority. Every ship needs fuel, provisions, maintenance crews. Every route needs coordination with a dozen different entities. Marcus began to smile. You want to slow them down? I want to stop them entirely. Stefan walked back to his desk, opening his laptop. Call Victor at Local 47. Tell him every Olympus ship that docks needs a full safety inspection before offloading begins. Call Chen at Customs. Tell him Olympus containers are flagged for random enhanced screening. Call Dimitri at the Port Authority. Olympus vessels go to the back of the berthing queue. No exceptions. That'll cost them millions in delays. Good. Stefan's eyes were flat, emotionless. I want their clients panicking by day 3. I want their stock dropping by day 5. I want them desperate by day 7. Then he looked up at Marcus. And I want to know everyone who was at that table. Everyone who laughed. Everyone who filmed. Everyone who did nothing. You're going after the whole family. I'm going after everyone who thought they could hurt her without consequence. Stefan closed the laptop. They poured boiling soup on my wife and filmed it for entertainment. So I'm going to teach them what it means when the world stops moving, when their ships sit dead in the water, when their containers rot on docks, when their entire empire freezes because the man they humiliated happens to control every port, every union, every customs official that makes their business possible. Marcus was already texting. How far do you want to take this? Stefan looked at the video one more time. Alora's face, the burns, the way she stood there, alone, while no one helped. All the way, he said quietly. I want them ruined. I want them begging. And then I want them to apologize to her publicly while the whole world watches. Phase 1 starts now, Marcus said. Stefan nodded. And Marcus? Make sure Alora never knows. As far as she's concerned, I'm just her husband who works in logistics. Nothing more. Marcus left, already making calls. Stefan stood at the window as dawn broke over the harbor, watching the ships that belonged to him in every way that mattered, beginning their day. Somewhere in that same city, Felix Phillips was probably still asleep, probably still drunk, probably still laughing. That was about to change. Stefan's second office existed on no public record. It occupied the top floor of a warehouse overlooking Port Newark, accessible only by a freight elevator that required 2 keys and a security code that changed daily. The windows were bulletproof. The room itself was sparse. A conference table, 8 chairs, and a wall of monitors showing real-time feeds from every major terminal in the tri-state area. This was where the real work happened. Where the man Manhattan's elite called a respected logistics executive became something else entirely. They arrived separately, 15 minutes apart, exactly as instructed. Victor Ramon from Longshoreman's Local 47, built like a loading crane, knuckles scarred from 30 years on the docks. Chen Wei from Customs, quiet and precise, who could make a container disappear into inspection purgatory for months. Dmitry Volkov from Port Authority, who decided which ships docked when and where. Maria Santos from the trucking union, who controlled every semi that moved freight out of the port. And finally, James Corrigan, the harbor pilot who guided ships into berth, who could delay a vessel for hours with a single radio call about weather concerns. Stefan stood at the head of the table as they settled into their chairs. No one spoke. They knew better. When Stefan called a meeting at this location, at this hour, it meant someone had made a mistake. A fatal one. Gentlemen, Maria, Stefan began, his voice measured. Thank you for coming. He pressed a button on the remote and the center monitor lit up. The video played. 43 seconds of his wife being burned, humiliated, destroyed in front of a room full of witnesses. When it ended, the only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. Victor's jaw clenched. Chen's expression went carefully blank. Dmitri leaned forward, studying the faces in the video. Maria's hand tightened on the armrest. The man who did this is Felix Phillips, Stefan continued. Olympus Global. I want you to understand something. I'm not asking you to hurt him. I'm not asking you to touch him. I'm asking you to do your jobs, thoroughly, meticulously, by the absolute letter of every regulation that exists. Victor spoke first, his voice gravelly. Every Olympus ship gets a full safety inspection before offload. His eyes met Stefan's. Those inspections can take a while, especially if we find discrepancies. Stefan nodded. Chen? Random enhanced screening on all Olympus containers, Chen said quietly. Full. Documentation review. Physical inspection of cargo. Cross-reference with international databases. Could take 72 hours per container. Maybe longer if there are questions. Dmitri was already pulling up his tablet. Olympus has 3 ships scheduled to dock this week. They just went to the bottom of the berthing queue. Weather delays, harbor congestion, safety protocols, standard procedure. Maria leaned back in her chair. Our drivers are independent contractors. Can't force them to take jobs they don't want. If Olympus containers aren't priority loads, if the rates aren't competitive, if the paperwork isn't perfect, well, her smile was thin. Trucks have other cargo to move. James, the harbor pilot, cleared his throat. I guide ships through these channels every day. It's precise work. Dangerous. If conditions aren't perfect, if I have any concerns about a vessel's readiness, about crew competency, about mechanical issues, I can delay entry indefinitely. For safety. Stefan looked at each of them in turn. No blood, he said clearly. No arrests, no violence, nothing that brings federal attention, nothing that creates a pattern anyone can prove. You're simply doing your jobs with exceptional attention to detail. Olympus Global will experience what every company experiences when logistics break down. Delays, complications, unfortunate timing. For how long? Victor asked. Until I say stop. Stefan's voice was ice. I want their shipments frozen. I want their clients calling, panicking, threatening to pull contracts. I want their operations managers working 18-hour days, trying to figure out why everything that used to take 3 days now takes 3 weeks. I want Felix Phillips and his uncle to feel their empire grinding to a halt, one container at a time. What about collateral damage? Chen asked. Other companies use the same terminals, same customs facilities. Then they'll experience minor delays, Stefan said. Regrettable, but unavoidable. This port processes 40,000 containers a day. A few dozen held up won't crash the system, but it will crash Olympus. Dmitri was already making notes. Their Asia routes are their biggest revenue stream. Container ships from Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong. If those vessels sit in holding patterns for a week, if their containers sit in inspection for another week, if trucks won't move the freight, they'll bleed millions, Maria finished. Daily. Stefan walked to the window, looking out at the port below. Cranes moved like mechanical giants, lifting containers from ships, stacking them in perfect rows. The entire system was a ballet of precision timing. Remove one element, slow one process, and everything backed up. It was beautiful in its fragility. The world moves on their time, Stefan said quietly, his back still to the room. They built their fortune on speed, on reliability, on being able to move goods faster than their competitors. So now they move on my time. He turned to face them. Now they learn what happens when the world stops moving. When do we start? Victor asked. Stefan checked his watch. Their container ship, the Olympus Horizon, is scheduled to dock at 0600 hours. It was 5:13 a.m. in 47 minutes. Victor stood, pulling out his phone. Then I need to make some calls. Safety inspection teams don't assemble themselves. The others rose, already texting, already setting Stefan's plan in motion. Within an hour, Olympus Global's entire supply chain would start experiencing difficulties. Small ones at first, a delayed berth, a surprise inspection, paperwork that needed review, but small difficulties, compounded over days, became catastrophic. Stefan stayed at the window as they left, watching the port wake up, watching the ships that would soon include the Olympus horizon. Phillips was probably still asleep, probably didn't even remember what he'd done last night. He was about to remember everything. By day 5, Olympus Global was bleeding. Not the slow leak of normal business losses, but arterial, the kind that made veteran logistics managers check the numbers 3 times because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Richard Phillips stood in the operations center at 6 a.m., watching the global tracking board light up like a Christmas tree of failure. Every red indicator represented a shipment delayed, a client panicking, a contract in jeopardy. The Singapore vessel carrying $200 million in electronics components had been anchored outside Los Angeles for 4 days. Harbor Control kept citing weather concerns, but every independent forecast showed clear skies. When Richard called the port authority directly, the man apologized profusely and promised to prioritize their berth. But the promise never materialized. The ship stayed anchored, burning $50,000 a day in fees and fuel. In New York, their largest client, a retail conglomerate expecting seasonal inventory, had just activated the penalty clause in their contract. $15 million in damages for late delivery. Their lawyers were already drafting termination papers, so the client's CEO had been ice cold on the phone. "We can't run our business on maybes and delays, Richard. You've been reliable for a decade, and now suddenly you can't move a single container on time? What changed?" Richard didn't have an answer. What changed was that every system that made modern shipping work had turned against them simultaneously. Customs inspections that normally took 6 hours were taking 6 days. Union crews that should have offloaded their containers were mysteriously unavailable, called away for training or safety reviews that materialized out of nowhere. Trucking companies that had serviced Olympus for years suddenly couldn't find drivers willing to take their freight. Torres, the operations manager, had stopped sleeping. He stood beside Richard now, 3 days of stubble on his face, eyes bloodshot. "I tracked down a customs supervisor in Newark, bought him drinks, got him talking. He says orders came down from somewhere high up. Every Olympus container gets the full treatment. Documentation review, physical inspection, background checks on the shippers. He's processed 40,000 containers in his career, and he's never seen scrutiny like this except for suspected drug shipments." "Did he say who gave the order?" Richard asked. Torres shook his head. Just that it came from above his pay grade and he wasn't asking questions. "But boss, it's not just customs. It's everyone. The pilots won't guide our ships in without extra safety briefings. The longshoremen find problems with every crane, every manifest, every piece of equipment. The port authority keeps bumping us for other carriers. It's coordinated. Someone with serious reach is orchestrating this." Richard's phone buzzed. The stock had opened down another 6%, 12% total in 3 days. Investors were demanding explanations. The board was scheduling an emergency meeting. 3 more clients had called asking pointed questions about their ability to fulfill contracts. One had already started sourcing alternatives. The door burst open. Felix walked in, no longer tan and relaxed, now pale and agitated. His hands shook slightly. "Uncle, we need to talk. About that waitress." Richard's jaw tightened. "Not now, Felix." "No, listen. I had someone look into her. Alora Weber. She's married to a guy named Stefan Thornto. Works in shipping logistics. And uncle, every single problem we're having, it traces back to people he's connected to. The union boss at Local 47. They went to school together. The customs supervisor, his brother works for one of Thornto's companies. The harbor pilots. Thornto sits on their pension fund board." Richard felt something cold settle in his stomach. Stefan Thornto. The name had been circling in his head for days, but he'd dismissed it. Thornto ran a mid-sized logistics firm, nothing compared to Olympus Global. Respected but not powerful. Except now Torres was pulling up information on his tablet, and the picture that emerged wasn't mid-sized at all. "Sir, if this is the same Stefan Thornto, he's connected to about 70% of the port operations on the East Coast. Shell companies, union positions, consulting contracts. He's everywhere in the infrastructure, but his name isn't on anything official. It's like he deliberately stays invisible." Richard sat down heavily. Show me that video again. The one from the ballroom. Felix pulled it up on his phone with trembling hands. 43 seconds. Boiling soup poured over Alora Weber's head. Her face, the pain, the humiliation. Felix laughing, everyone laughing, the phone recording every moment. You poured boiling soup on the wife of the man who controls every port we use, Richard said quietly. Every union we need, every customs office we depend on. And you filmed it. Felix's voice cracked. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? The tracking board behind them showed the Olympus horizon, still sitting at dock, still waiting for longshoremen who wouldn't come. The Singapore vessel, still anchored, still burning money. Container after container stuck in customs purgatory. Ship after ship bumped from berth schedules. The entire empire his father built, grinding to a halt because his nephew had decided to humiliate someone's wife for entertainment. Richard's phone rang. His CFO. The losses were approaching $80 million in direct costs, with projected losses reaching $300 million if the delays continued another week. 2 major clients had formally terminated their contracts. The stock was in free fall. Find me a way to reach Stefan Thornto, Richard said to his assistant. I don't care how. I don't care what it costs. Find him and set up a meeting. Tell him we need to talk about his wife. Felix started to speak. Richard held up a hand. You don't get to talk anymore, Felix. You've done enough. Now we fix this, if we still can. The operations board flickered. Another shipment delayed. Another client threatening penalties. Another day of watching everything they'd built slowly, methodically, impossibly destroyed. And somewhere across the city, Stefan Thornto was watching the same numbers, and he hadn't even started yet. The call from Shanghai came at 2 a.m. New York time. Richard Phillips was still awake, had been awake for 36 hours straight, staring at spreadsheets that showed his company hemorrhaging money. When his phone lit up with the international number, he knew before answering that it was bad news. Nobody called at 2 a.m. with good news. Mr. Phillips, the voice was clipped, efficient. This is James Chen from Apex Electronics. I'm calling to inform you that we're exercising the termination clause in our contract, effective immediately. Richard's hand tightened on the phone. James, if this is about the delays, it's about reliability, Mr. Phillips. We've worked with Olympus Global for 7 years, 7 years of on-time delivery, of contracts fulfilled to the letter. Then suddenly, in the span of 1 week, you can't move a single shipment. Our inventory is stuck in 3 different ports. Our production lines are shutting down. We're losing $2 million a day because your containers are sitting in customs, or waiting for berth space, or being inspected for problems that don't exist. We're working on it. This is temporary. Just give us... Temporary? James's voice rose slightly, the only crack in his professional demeanor. Mr. Phillips, we found alternative carriers. They're moving our freight right now through the same ports you can't access, with the same customs offices you can't clear. Whatever problem you have, it's yours alone. The contract termination papers will arrive by morning. The penalty for breach is $50 million. We expect payment within 30 days. The line went dead. Richard sat in the silence of his office, watching the city lights through the window. $50 million gone, just like that. And Apex wasn't the only one. 3 other clients had already terminated. 2 more were threatening. The dominoes were falling faster than he could count them. His phone rang again. This time it was David Winters, Senior Vice President at Metropolitan Trust, Olympus Global's primary lender. They held $400 million in credit lines and commercial paper. David's voice was professionally concerned, which was somehow worse than angry. Richard, we need to talk about your credit facility. The board met this morning to discuss your recent operational difficulties. Richard closed his eyes. Operational difficulties, such a clean phrase for complete systemic collapse. We're addressing the issues, Richard said, trying to keep his voice steady. It's a temporary disruption in our supply chain. We expect full resolution within... Richard, David interrupted gently. We've been your banking partner for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this. Every single one of your shipments is delayed. Every port, every route, every customs office. Your stock has dropped 18% in 5 days. Major clients are terminating contracts. We're looking at your quarterly projections and the numbers don't work anymore." "What are you saying, David?" "I'm saying the bank is concerned about your ability to service your debt obligations. We're considering a margin call on your credit facility. You'd need to provide additional collateral or reduce your outstanding balance by $100 million within 10 days. Richard felt the floor drop out from under him. A margin call would force them to liquidate assets, probably at fire sale prices, in a market that already smelled blood. It would signal to every client, every competitor, every investor that Olympus Global was in crisis. The company would be circling the drain. "Give me a week," Richard said quietly. "1 week to fix this." David was silent for a moment. "I'll hold the board off for 7 days. But Richard, if things don't improve dramatically, we'll have no choice. The bank has its own obligations to consider." After David hung up, Richard called his head of security, a former federal investigator named Morrison, who cost $400,000 a year precisely because he was good at finding things people wanted hidden. Morrison arrived 20 minutes later with a thick folder and a grim expression. He spread papers across Richard's desk. Port authority logs, customs records, union work schedules, shipping manifests. "I found it," Morrison said. "The pattern, every single delay, every inspection, every work stoppage, it all leads back to the same cluster of people. Victor Ramon at Local 47, Chen Wei in Customs, Dmitry Volkov at Port Authority, Maria Santos at the Trucking Union, James Corrigan, the harbor pilot. On the surface, they have nothing in common. Different agencies, different jurisdictions. But," Richard leaned forward, "but they all have one connection. Stefan Thornto." Morrison pulled out a network diagram, lines connecting names and companies. Ramon went to high school with Thornto in Brooklyn. Chen's brother works for one of Thornto's shell companies. Volkov sits on a pension fund board that Thornto chairs. Santos negotiated her union contract with Thornto's consulting firm. Corrigan's Harbor Pilot Association gets funding from a charity Thornto runs. Richard stared at the web of connections. "It's him. He's doing all of this." Morrison nodded. "And it's brilliant in a terrifying way. He's not breaking any laws. Every delay has a legitimate reason on paper. Safety inspections, customs protocols, union regulations. But the timing, the coordination, the fact that it's only hitting Olympus Global, that's not coincidence. That's warfare." Richard thought about the video. Felix pouring boiling soup over Alora Weber's head. Her husband watching that video, seeing his wife burned and humiliated while a room full of people laughed. And then Stefan Thornto, who controlled more of the city's infrastructure than Richard had ever imagined, deciding to teach them what power really looked like. "Can we fight back?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. "With what?" Morrison spread his hands. "He controls the ports we need, the unions we depend on, the customs offices we have to clear. We can't ship without him. And he's not making demands, not threatening, not doing anything we could take to court or the authorities. He's just making sure every regulation is followed to the letter, and it's destroying us." Richard's office door opened. Felix stood there, looking small and young and terrified. "Uncle, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to—" "Get out," Richard said quietly. "But I can fix this. I can apologize. I can—" "You can't fix this, Felix. You humiliated a man's wife and put it on video for fun. And now we're learning the cost." Richard looked at Morrison. "Find me a way to reach Stefan Thornto. Set up a meeting. I'll go to him. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever it takes." Morrison nodded and left. Felix remained in the doorway, crying now, but Richard couldn't look at him. He turned back to the window, watching the pre-dawn light touch the city, and wondered how much of his empire would still exist by the time the sun set again. Wait. If you're not subscribed, you don't deserve to see how this ends. I'm serious. People who enjoy watching bullies get destroyed. Then subscribe, show your support. The Vultures arrived on day 6, dressed in tailored suits and carrying briefcases filled with term sheets. Richard Phillips watched them file into the Olympus Global conference room with the weary resignation of a man who knew he had no cards left to play. 3 private equity firms, all expressing deep concern about Olympus's situation, all offering to help by purchasing their distressed debt at steep discounts. The first offer came from Sentinel Capital Partners. They'd buy $150 million in commercial paper from Metropolitan Trust at 70 cents on the dollar. Very generous under the circumstances, their representative said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Given your current operational challenges, most buyers wouldn't touch this debt at any price. The second firm, Apex Holdings, wanted to purchase their canceled cargo insurance policies. When clients terminated contracts, insurance companies got stuck holding the risk. Apex would assume those liabilities for a fee and a percentage of any future claims. We're taking a significant risk here, their lawyer explained. If your supply chain doesn't recover, these policies could cost us hundreds of millions. The third firm didn't have a name Richard recognized. Harborview Financial Group. They wanted everything: the debt, the insurance exposure, the accounts receivable from clients who hadn't paid yet because shipments hadn't arrived. Their offer was the most aggressive and the most comprehensive. We can take this entire mess off your hands, their representative said. Give you room to breathe while you fix your operational issues. Richard's CFO, Sarah Chen, studied the term sheets with increasing alarm. These aren't rescue packages, she whispered to Richard. These are acquisition vehicles. If we accept these terms, we're giving away operational control. Harborview alone would own enough of our debt structure to force major decisions. Do we have a choice? Richard asked quietly. Sarah was silent. They both knew the answer. Metropolitan Trust's margin call was due in 48 hours. Without selling some of this distressed debt, they couldn't meet it. And if they couldn't meet it, the bank would seize collateral and trigger acceleration clauses across their entire credit facility. The company would be in bankruptcy by Friday. Richard signed the Harborview deal first, then Sentinel, then Apex. Each signature felt like giving away a piece of his company's future. But what choice did he have? The alternative was total collapse. The representatives left, satisfied. Sarah gathered the contracts, her hands shaking slightly. I'll file these with the board. They're not going to be happy. After she left, Richard sat alone in the conference room, staring at the contracts he'd just signed. Something nagged at him. The timing was too perfect. These firms had appeared within hours of each other, all with fully developed term sheets, all ready to buy distressed Olympus debt that had only become distressed 6 days ago. That kind of preparation took weeks, not hours. He called Morrison. I need you to run background checks on 3 companies: Sentinel Capital Partners, Apex Holdings, and Harborview Financial Group. Deep checks. I want to know who owns them, who funds them, who sits on their boards. Morrison called back 90 minutes later. His voice was tight. You need to see this in person. Richard met him in a secure office 2 floors down. Morrison had printed out corporate structure charts, ownership documents, SEC filings. He spread them across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Sentinel Capital Partners is owned by a holding company registered in Delaware. That holding company is owned by another holding company in Nevada. I traced it back through 7 layers. At the bottom, a trust managed by a law firm that has one major client, Stefan Thornto. Richard's stomach dropped. And the others? Apex Holdings? Same structure, different route. Ultimately controlled by an investment vehicle tied to Thornto. Harborview Financial, even more direct. The managing partner is Marcus Volkov, brother of Dmitry Volkov from the Port Authority, the same Dmitry who's been delaying your ships. Richard sat down slowly. He owns them, all 3 firms, which means he now owns most of your operating debt, Morrison finished. He can't force bankruptcy outright, but he controls enough to influence major decisions. And if you miss any payments, if you breach any covenants, he can accelerate the debt and force a restructuring. He essentially controls your company's financial future. Richard's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it for a long moment before answering. The voice was calm, measured, with a slight Brooklyn accent underneath the professional polish. Mr. Phillips, this is Stefan Thornto. I believe we need to talk. Richard's mouth went dry. Mr. Thornto, I've been trying to reach you. I know. I've been busy reviewing some recent acquisitions. Distressed debt, insurance liabilities, that sort of thing. Interesting how quickly assets can change hands when a company is in crisis. Richard closed his eyes. What do you want? What I want, Stefan said, his voice dropping to something colder, is for you and Felix to meet me tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I'll send you the address. Come alone. No lawyers, no security, no recordings. Just you, your nephew, and the understanding that you've lost control of everything you thought you owned. Mr. Thornto, I apologize for what happened to your wife. Sincerely. Felix made a terrible mistake. Your apologies mean nothing to me, Mr. Phillips. Stefan's voice was ice. You'll apologize to the person you hurt, not to me, and you'll do it on my terms. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Don't be late. The cost of being late is higher than you can afford. The line went dead. Richard sat in the silence, the phone still pressed to his ear. Morrison watched him with something like pity. He has us, Richard said quietly. Completely. He orchestrated everything, the delays, the financial panic, the distressed debt. He didn't just attack our operations. He positioned himself to own us. What are you going to do? Richard stood, suddenly feeling every one of his 58 years. I'm going to take Felix to meet the man we should have left alone, and I'm going to pray that whatever he demands, we can survive paying it. He walked to the window, looking out at the harbor where ships that used to be his moved through channels controlled by someone else. Somewhere in that same city, his nephew had poured boiling soup on a woman's head and laughed about it. And now they were learning what happened when you hurt someone who belonged to a man who moved the world in ways they'd never understood. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., they would learn the price. Richard Phillips made Felix watch the video 17 times. Not in private, not with any mercy, but in the Olympus Global boardroom with the entire executive team present. The video played on the main screen, 43 seconds on loop, while Felix sat at the head of the table and Richard stood behind him like an executioner. Watch it again, Richard said. His voice was flat, emotionless. Tell me what you see? Felix's face was pale, slick with sweat. Uncle, please. I get it. I made a mistake. You don't get anything. Watch it. The video played. Alora Weber moving through the ballroom, professional, invisible. Felix standing up, reaching for the soup tureen, the ladle rising, the boiling liquid pouring over her head in slow motion, her body going rigid. The steam, the way her hands came up, trembling, useless. The burns forming in real time on her forehead. The laughter, Felix's laughter, loudest of all. The CFO, Sarah Chen, looked away. She'd seen it 12 times already and couldn't stomach another. The operations manager, Torres, stared at the table. The legal counsel made notes but didn't look up. Do you know what that moment cost us? Richard asked quietly. That 43 seconds of entertainment? Felix didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Apex Electronics, $50 million penalty, contract terminated. Richard's voice was mechanical, reciting a eulogy. Consolidated Imports, $38 million, gone. Westfield Logistics, $22 million. 3 more contracts under review, another $100 million at risk. Our stock has dropped 23%. We've lost $400 million in market capitalization in 6 days. He walked around the table, placing documents in front of Felix with each statement. Bank statements showing the margin call, legal notices from terminated clients, the distressed debt sale agreements that Felix hadn't seen yet. And these, Richard said, his voice finally showing emotion, rage breaking through the professional veneer. These are the companies that bought our debt when we were desperate. Sentinel Capital, Apex Holdings, Harborview Financial. Do you know who owns them? Felix shook his head, tears running down his face now. Stefan Thornto, the husband of the woman you assaulted. He orchestrated our collapse, then bought our debt at a discount. He now controls our financial future, and tomorrow morning you and I are going to meet him and learn what that means. The room was silent, except for Felix's quiet sobbing. Richard looked at his nephew, this boy he'd mentored, groomed, prepared to take over the family business one day, and saw only weakness. Entitled, careless weakness that had destroyed 3 generations of work. But Richard also saw something else, his own reflection. Because hadn't he taught Felix that they were untouchable? Hadn't he spent 20 years showing him that wealth meant freedom from consequences, that the right name and the right connections could smooth over any mistake? Hadn't Richard himself dismissed employees, underpaid workers, used his position to avoid accountability? Felix had learned his arrogance from someone, and that someone was standing in this room. "I failed you," Richard said quietly, and Felix looked up, surprised. "I taught you that people like us don't face consequences, that service workers are invisible, that their dignity doesn't matter, that we can do what we want because we have money and power. I taught you wrong, and now we're both learning the cost." Sarah cleared her throat. "Sir, about tomorrow's meeting, do we know what Thornto wants?" "No." Richard sat down heavily. "But I know what I'd want if someone did this to my wife. He'd want blood. Justice. Complete destruction. The question is whether he'll settle for something less than that." The legal counsel spoke up. "We should prepare a settlement offer. Financial compensation, public apology, maybe a donation to a relevant charity." Richard held up a hand. "We're not negotiating. We have no leverage. We're going to listen to his terms, and we're going to accept them, because the alternative is bankruptcy." He glanced at Felix. "And possible criminal charges for assault." Felix's head snapped up. "Criminal charges? You poured boiling soup on someone's head and filmed it. The burns were severe enough to require medical treatment. If Thornto wants to press charges, he has evidence, witnesses, and probably a district attorney who owes him favors." Sarah pulled up her tablet. "Sir, there's another issue. The video has been circulating on social media. Felix's friends posted it to several private groups, but it leaked. It's on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, 500,000 views in the last 24 hours. The comments are brutal." Richard's jaw tightened. "Show me." Sarah turned the tablet around. The comments scrolled endlessly. "Rich, entitled brats. Hope she sues. This is why people hate the wealthy. Someone find out who this guy is and where he works." The video had been screen recorded, shared, dissected. Someone had identified the Grand Astor Ballroom. Someone else had identified Olympus Global's logo on Felix's guest credentials. "We need crisis management," the legal counsel said. "PR firm, social media scrubbing, maybe a preemptive statement." "No," Richard said. "We're not managing this. We're not spinning it. Felix is going to own what he did." He looked at his nephew. "Starting now, you're off all social media. Every account, every platform deleted. Your friends, anyone who was at that table, they're cut off. No contact, no statements, nothing. But Uncle, you're done talking, Felix. You're done making decisions. Tomorrow you're going to meet Stefan Thornto, and you're going to do exactly what he tells you to do. You're going to apologize to his wife however he demands. You're going to accept whatever terms he sets. And then you're going to disappear from public life until I say otherwise. Do you understand?" Felix nodded, broken. Richard stood, gathering the documents. "The meeting is at 10 a.m. Dress appropriately. Look humble. And Felix?" He paused at the door. "Pray that Stefan Thornto is a better man than we are. Because if he's not, if he decides to destroy us completely, we have no way to stop him." The boardroom emptied. Felix sat alone at the table, the video still frozen on the screen behind him. Alora Weber's face, soup dripping from her hair, pain and humiliation in her eyes. The woman he'd dismissed as nobody, as invisible, as someone who didn't matter. The woman whose husband was about to teach him exactly how much she mattered. And how little Felix did. The address Stefan sent led to a warehouse in Red Hook, the kind of building that didn't appear on corporate directories or Google Maps. Richard and Felix arrived at 9:55 a.m. in an unmarked car, no driver, no security, exactly as instructed. The freight elevator required a code that had been texted to Richard's phone 5 minutes earlier. It would expire at 10:01. The elevator opened onto a single room, sparse and functional. A conference table, 6 chairs, windows overlooking the container port where ships moved like chess pieces across gray water. And Stefan Thornto, standing at the window with his back to them, watching the machinery of commerce he controlled. He didn't turn around when they entered, didn't acknowledge them for a full minute. Richard and Felix stood there, waiting, and the silence was heavier than any words could have been. Finally, Stefan spoke. "Sit." They sat. Stefan remained at the window for another 30 seconds, then turned. He was younger than Richard expected, maybe 40, dark hair going silver at the temples, wearing a simple charcoal suit that probably cost less than Felix's shoes. But his eyes, when they settled on Felix, were the coldest thing Richard had ever seen. "Do you know what the human body does when it's burned?" Stefan asked conversationally. He walked to the table slowly, deliberately. The skin tries to protect itself. Blood vessels dilate. Fluid leaks into the tissue. Nerves fire pain signals so intense that the brain can go into shock. Second-degree burns, the kind your soup caused, take weeks to heal. They leave scars, sometimes permanent ones. Felix stared at the table, trembling. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Stefan said quietly. Felix's head snapped up. "That's what you did to my wife. For entertainment, while your friends filmed it and laughed. While a room full of people watched and did nothing." "Mr. Thornto," Richard began, "we came here to—" "You came here to learn what happens when you hurt someone I love," Stefan interrupted, his voice never rising above conversation level. "You came here because your company is collapsing, your debt is controlled by entities I own, and you have no options left. So you'll sit quietly while I explain how this works." He placed a folder on the table, opened it. Inside was a contract, already prepared, already notarized, waiting only for signatures. "These are my terms," Stefan said. "Non-negotiable. First, Felix will issue a public, televised apology to my wife. Not a statement released through lawyers, not a social media post. He will appear on camera in front of journalists, and he will describe in detail what he did. The temperature of the soup, the pain he caused, the humiliation. He will explain why he did it, that it was cruel and indefensible, and he will apologize directly to Alora, by name." Felix's face crumbled, but Stefan continued without pause. "Second, Olympus Global will pay $100 million in penalties. $50 million goes to a burn victims recovery fund. $50 million goes to a welfare fund for port workers and service industry employees. You will make this payment within 30 days. Richard's jaw tightened. "That's—" "Third," Stefan said, ignoring him. "Olympus Global will transfer a 20% non-voting ownership stake to a holding company I designate. You'll retain operational control, but I will have visibility into every major decision you make, every contract, every route, every executive hire. And if I see behavior that reminds me of what happened to my wife, I will activate clauses in your debt agreements that will put you in bankruptcy within 72 hours. The room was silent except for the distant sound of container cranes working the port below. Fourth, Stefan's eyes locked onto Felix. You will disappear. No more social events, no more board positions, no more public life whatsoever. You'll resign from every position at Olympus Global, effective immediately. Your trust fund remains yours. You won't starve, but you will never work in this industry again. You will never attend events where service workers might have to endure your presence. You will become as invisible as you treated my wife." Felix was crying now, silent tears running down his face. Richard felt something break inside his chest watching his nephew destroyed, but he also felt the terrible weight of justice, earned and unavoidable. "And if we refuse?" Richard asked, though he already knew. Stefan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I accelerate your debt, crash your stock, and make sure every port from here to Singapore knows that Olympus Global is untouchable. Your clients will leave, your ships will rot, and in 6 months I'll buy what's left of your company at auction for pennies on the dollar. But Felix will still face criminal assault charges, because I have the video, I have witnesses, and I have a district attorney who owes me favors." He pushed the contract across the table. "Or you can sign this. Olympus Global survives, diminished but functional. Felix learns what consequences feel like. And my wife gets the public acknowledgement that what happened to her was wrong. Witnessed by the same kind of people who watched and did nothing. Richard picked up the pen. His hand shook slightly. The terms were devastating but survivable. Barely. He looked at Felix, who was staring at the contract like it was a death sentence. In a way, it was. The death of his career, his reputation, his place in the world he'd been born into. "Sign it," Richard said quietly. Felix hesitated. "Sign it, or I will let him destroy everything, and you'll end up with nothing anyway." Felix signed, then Richard signed. Stefan collected the documents without a word, placed them back in the folder. "The apology will happen in 3 days," Stefan said. "My people will arrange the press conference. You will say what I told you to say. You will not deviate. You will not minimize. You will give my wife the dignity you took from her. Do you understand?" Felix nodded, unable to speak. "Mr. Thornto," Richard said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry, truly. What Felix did was unforgivable, and I take responsibility for raising him to think he could behave that way. If I could undo it—" "You can't undo it," Stefan said, "but you can make sure it never happens again. Not just to my wife, to anyone." He looked at both of them. "People aren't invisible because they serve you. They're not disposable because they're not rich. You learned that this week. Don't forget it." He walked back to the window, dismissing them with his silence. Richard stood, pulling Felix up with him. They walked to the elevator without another word. As the doors closed, Richard caught one last glimpse of Stefan standing at the window, looking out at the port he controlled, the city he owned, in ways Richard had never understood. In the elevator, Felix finally spoke. "What have I done?" Richard didn't answer. There was no answer that mattered anymore. They'd learned what power really looked like, and it looked like a man in a plain office who'd dismantled their empire without raising his voice once. 3 days later, Felix would apologize on camera. The clip would go viral. Olympus Global would survive, but under Stefan's shadow. And Alora Weber would finally receive the justice she deserved, public and complete. But first, they had to live with knowing they'd brought this on themselves. The press. Conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Grand Astor Hotel, the same building where it happened. Stefan's people had arranged everything with precision that bordered on cruelty. The same ballroom, the same lighting, even some of the same staff working that day, standing in the back, watching. Alora didn't want to go. Stefan had told her that morning, carefully, that Felix Phillips was making a public statement about what happened, and she could attend if she wanted to. He didn't tell her he'd orchestrated every moment of it. Didn't tell her about the collapsing empire, the debt acquisition, the terms he'd dictated. He just held her hand and said, "You deserve to hear him say it, but only if you want to." She went. She wore the blouse Stefan had bought her to replace the ruined one, stood in the back of the ballroom with 20 other hotel workers who'd been there that night, and watched Felix Phillips walk to the podium like a man approaching his own execution. The cameras were everywhere. Local news, national networks, social media live streams. Someone had leaked that this was about the viral video, the one with 500,000 views and counting, and reporters smelled blood in the water. Felix's hands shook as he gripped the podium. Richard stood beside him, stone-faced. No lawyers, no PR team, no carefully crafted statement cards. Just Felix, alone, about to destroy himself on camera. "My name is Felix Phillips," he began, his voice cracking. "9 days ago, at an event in this hotel, I committed an act of cruelty that I can never take back. I assaulted a woman named Alora Weber, a server who was working that night, by pouring boiling soup over her head. The room was silent. Cameras clicked. Someone in the press corps whispered into their phone. The soup was French onion, still hot from the kitchen, probably 180 degrees. I used a ladle and poured it directly onto her head, her face, her neck. It caused second-degree burns. It caused her pain that I can't even imagine. And I did it because I was drunk, because I thought it was funny, because I saw her as beneath me, as someone who didn't matter." Alora felt tears burning in her eyes. Not from sadness now, but from something else. Validation. Witnessing. The public acknowledgement that what happened to her was real and wrong. I was raised to believe that wealth gave me the right to treat people however I wanted, Felix continued, his voice breaking. That service workers were invisible, that their dignity didn't matter. I was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. And the cost of that belief has been the destruction of my family's company and my own future. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Alora Weber. Felix looked directly at the back of the room where Alora stood. I am profoundly sorry. I caused you physical pain and public humiliation for my own entertainment. You did nothing to deserve it. You were doing your job with professionalism and grace, and I attacked you. Because I could. Because I thought there would be no consequences. I was wrong about that too. He stepped back from the podium. No questions, Richard said sharply to the reporters already shouting. This is an apology, not a press conference. They left through a side door, Felix's shoulders hunched, Richard's face carved from granite. The video was online within minutes. By evening, it had 3 million views. By the next morning, 15 million. The comments were savage but supportive of Alora. Finally, some accountability. She deserved this apology and more. Look how uncomfortable he is. Good. Money can't buy back dignity once you've destroyed someone's. And in offices across the port, in customs facilities and union halls and port authority headquarters, Stefan made a single phone call. It's done. Resume normal operations. The Olympus Horizon, stuck at anchor for 8 days, received immediate clearance to dock. Longshoremen materialized to offload containers. Customs inspections that had taken 72 hours now took 6. Trucking companies suddenly had available drivers. Ships that had been bumped from schedules found berth space. The entire logistical machine that had frozen solid began moving again, like someone had flipped a switch. Richard received the news in his office, watching the tracking board turn from red to yellow to green. Torres stood beside him, stunned. It's like nothing ever happened. Everything's moving. Not nothing, Richard said quietly. Everything happened. We just get to survive it. Olympus Global would recover, diminished but functional. The 20% stake Stefan owned would hang over every decision they made. Felix's name would be scrubbed from every company document, every board position, every social register. He would live comfortably on his trust fund, but in complete obscurity, learning finally what it meant to be invisible. Alora returned to work the following week. The manager who'd grabbed her arm and sent her to the break room was gone, quietly fired. The staff treated her differently now, with a respect that felt earned. Guests who'd seen the viral apology recognized her sometimes, nodded with something like reverence. The woman who stood up to wealth and won, even though she'd done nothing but survive. That evening, Stefan came home at 6 like always, found Alora in the kitchen, making dinner like always. He kissed her forehead and asked about her day like always. It was good, she said, smiling. Really good. People were kind. I'm glad, Stefan said, and he meant it with everything he had. They ate dinner together, talking about small things, normal things. Alora never asked why Felix Phillips had apologized so publicly, so thoroughly, never questioned the timing of it. Stefan never told her about the empire he'd dismantled, the debt he'd acquired, the war he'd fought in her name. She just knew that the man who'd hurt her had faced consequences, that she'd been seen, finally, as someone who mattered. And that was enough. Somewhere across the city, Felix Phillips sat alone in his apartment. His phone disconnected, his social media deleted, his future erased. Learning, too late, that some people you hurt turn out to have husbands who move the world. And some debts get paid in full, whether you can afford them or not. That's justice. Felix lost everything because he spent 43 seconds being cruel to someone he thought was nobody. Now tell me, have you ever met someone like Felix? Someone who treated people like they're invisible? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it, and if this hit you the way it hit me, subscribe right now. I stay up till 3:45 a.m. writing these stories. Don't miss the next one. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's make sure people like Alora keep getting their justice. Because the moment we stop caring, that's when people like Felix win. Don't let them win. Subscribe.